Amid the grandeur of Elizabethan England, Queen Elizabeth I was the symbol of sovereignty, wit, and the educated mystique of royalty. Her persona was groomed carefully, an ever-virgin queen, patron of the arts, divine personification of national pride. History recalls her for her resplendent court, routing of the Spanish Armada, and the emergence of England as a Protestant superpower. But beneath this tradition, beneath the tulle and pearl-draped suavity and powdered poise, was a king ruled by fear, vanity, and by the incessant management of appearance. While cleanliness was ritual rather than science at this time, Queen Elizabeth I's intimate toilet practices were, by contemporary standards, seriously surprising. They were more than a product of their time. They were an expression of deliberate political image. In an age where rulers were to be seen to be more symbol than flesh, the Queen developed a body not to be touched by water or by time. Today we look at 5 of the most strange and telling hygiene rituals surrounding Elizabeth I, each one a window into the extremes she went to keep her myth going, even when her body was giving out. Queen Elizabeth I's radiant court was filled with poetry, wit, and grandeur, but its most bitter irony may have been Queen Elizabeth's addiction to sugar. At a time when refined sugar was a precious and expensive import, hoarded in chests and counted like treasure, Elizabeth consumed it with regal extravagance. She loved candied violets, sugar-soaked marzipan, candied fruits, and other ornate sweets at her court. Having sugar was having power, and she devoured it as if devouring England's emerging wealth itself. Alas, dental care in the 16th century was rudimentary at best and horribly misdirected at worst. The Queen allegedly used a sweet paste of sugar and herbs to brush her teeth. This habit, instead of safeguarding her smile, hastened decay. Abrasives mixed with sugar only weakened the enamel and welcomed rot. By the 1590s, European ambassadors commented on Elizabeth's teeth having turned black, and some of them were missing altogether. Her breath, in the opinion of the herbalist John Gerard, was bad enough to cause discomfort to those in her proximity. Some even complained that they were unable to make out what she said due to the absence of these teeth. In spite of this, she resolutely rejected painful extractions insisted on by her doctors. On one occasion, one of her courtiers had a tooth pulled in her presence, merely to demonstrate that the procedure was survivable. Still more intriguing was the domino effect of her rotting grin. Her court's noble women started blackening their own teeth to resemble her with soot and charcoal. Blackened teeth fashion arose not from attractiveness, but as a marker of prosperity and emulation of the monarch. Visible decay was aspirational in the Tudor social hierarchy, as long as it belonged to the Queen. Of the numerous quotes for which Queen Elizabeth I is credited, one of the most long-standing is, "I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not." Though its validity remains questionable, it has the essence of an age in which people did not think of water as a cleanser but as a danger. To bathe often was to risk illness, disturb the equilibrium of the body humors, and chance coming in contact with bad air or miasma, which was thought to be a disease carrier. Bathing was not something Elizabeth did every day. Rather, she practiced changing her linen shifts, garments next to the skin, often even several times in one day. These clothes were thought to extract impurities and cleanse the body by mere contact. To her peers, this was not only adequate but praiseworthy. Elizabeth used rose water, vinegar washes, and elaborate herbal infusions made for her by her apothecaries instead of soap and water. These were applied gently by her servants, intended not merely to revitalize but safeguard in the lack of available running water. These precautions were considered the best and safest ways of preserving decorum. Her palaces had no plumbing. Bathing, when it did happen, was an exercise in logistics that entailed wooden tubs, hot water transported in buckets, and a minimum of 3 servants. The process was so elaborate that immersion to the neck was a rare indulgence, one planned for with the same deliberation as a coronation. However, Elizabeth was considered clean according to the norms of her day. She had hundreds of dresses, wore perfume-scented gloves and handkerchiefs, and insisted that each aspect of her appearance be perfect, but it was cleanliness in an illusion. The Queen did not shy away from bath time because she was lazy. She stayed away from it because water risked spoiling the immaculate image she presented to the world. Elizabeth's face is perhaps the most familiar in the pages of history. Pale, unblemished, almost ghostly. It was not mere makeup. It was policy. In a time where white skin was the hallmark of nobility and God's favor, cosmetics became a shield for the Queen against judgment, and a badge of power. Venetian ceruse, A paste of white lead and vinegar was the makeup she favored. This poisonous concoction produced the appearance of unblemished skin at the cost of slowly killing it. Eventually, it poisoned the queen's face, causing her scars, lesions, and an ever-growing dependence on thicker and thicker layers. Adding to the damage was the makeup on her lips, usually composed of cinnabar or vermilion with mercury. That too leached into her bloodstream, causing her health to decline, heightening mood swings, and inducing neurological symptoms characteristic of mercury poisoning. Still, she persisted. Why? For her skin was not just hers, but the realm's. Elizabeth employed her looks to hold court, to dazzle and terrorize foes, and to withhold time itself. She would not be painted with natural light. Artists working on portraits had to employ stylized templates, working again with idealized features from previous works. Her face was virtually a mask during her last years, said to be so delicate that touching it could cause it to shatter. Historians disagree about whether she realized the risk of her makeups, but there is no doubt she felt that her appearance must be preserved, even if her body underneath it collapsed. She didn't wash her face regularly. Washing it would have removed the mask and with it the myth of Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, hidden behind the richly embroidered tapestries and under the gold-leafed ceilings of Elizabethan palaces. There was a nasty secret: there was no plumbing. For all Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth I was living in more medieval than modern conditions. The palaces she called home, such as Hampton Court and Richmond Palace, had no toilets, no sewage, and indeed no running water. Instead, human excrement was dealt with by systems unchanged since the Middle Ages. The Queen's very own private toilet, or close stool, was an elaborate cushioned chair with a hole in the seat, below which a ceramic chamber pot was left. This pot needed to be emptied, washed, and scented several times a day, not by faceless servants but by one of the most senior and respected officials in the court, the groom of the stool. Ironically named, the groom of the stool was not humble attendant, but a nobleman of high rank, appointed for loyalty and discretion. He had unparalleled access to the queen at her most intimate moments, helping with dressing, bathing, and even political consultations. To be groom of the stool was an honor, and a calculated role of power within the royal household. Outside the queen's bedchamber, the dynamics of waste disposal were much more mundane. The entire palace ran on a scheme of chamber pots and cesspits. Servants, popularly referred to as gong farmers or night soil men, were responsible for disposing of the waste under the cover of night, hauling heavy buckets down narrow corridors, stairways, and courtyards to be dumped into special trenches or pits. These cesspits, usually situated just beyond the palace walls or even beneath some rooms, were putrid, disease-infested, and apt to overflow. The odor of court life was a constant dilemma. To cover up the smell, herbs like rosemary, lavender, and sweet marjoram were strewn on the floors or used as incense. Rushes were laid on the floorboards and scented using oils, but these rushes were not regularly replaced. Underneath them were piles of dirt, hair, food waste, and unspoken grime. Even the queen's movements were tactically planned so that she would not have to tread near bad smells. She made the journey continually between royal palaces, not just for political reasons, but also to move out of the certain accumulation of rubbish. Without plumbing, all the grandeur in the world could not keep a palace clean for more than a while. The more the court remained at a single place, the worse the odor and the sanitation conditions were. For all its opulence, Elizabeth's court was a world of paradoxes, where perfumes masked decay, where velvet-lined seats hid chamber pots, and where the most powerful woman in the realm lived side by side with the unshakable odor of humanity. To fully understand Queen Elizabeth I's hygiene habits, one must first understand her relationship with control. All of her body, from the powdered face to the gloved hands, was a sign not of beauty but of authority. Nowhere is this seen more than in her refusal to bathe. Water was not only a nuisance in the Tudor age, it was intimate. To bathe was to expose one's body, to soften one's skin, to welcome both disease and vulnerability, and Elizabeth, who had witnessed women broken by frailty, including her own mother, Anne Boleyn, could not risk appearing fragile. Rather than cleansing with water, Elizabeth wrapped herself in a daily ritual of scented armor. She surrounded herself with custom-blended preparations produced in the palace's still rooms: lavender, rose orris root, cloves, and rosemary soaked in vinegar or spirits. These liquids were not designed to scrub away dirt, but to cover up smell and cement her untouchable status. A morning dabbing of rose water on the wrists, a swift spritz behind the ears, and the queen would move through her court, leaving not sweat but an artfully constructed aura. She wore perfumed pomanders, elaborate orb-shaped ornaments filled with resins and herbs, shoved into her bodice or clipped to her belt. When foul odors overpowered her, she merely held them up to her nose and inhaled carefully curated cleanliness. They were functional, but they were also symbolic. They announced her separation from the ordinary world in which cleanliness was battled with soap and water. For Elizabeth, scent was not just a matter of taste, it was a line. Even her wardrobe became part of this olfactory defense. Her gloves were scented, her handkerchiefs embroidered and steeped in scented oils. The queen's own clothes, thick and layered, were used both to conceal the body and protect its scent. She was also said to give perfumed gloves to special courtiers, a means of sharing her mastered scent with others but never the origin. Bathing with hair washing was impossible. Her own hair, usually hidden under intricately styled wigs, was powdered and stiffened with egg whites or sugar water. When her own hair started to thin through age or lead poisoning, she wore auburn-colored wigs that were closely scented and curled with exquisite care. But underneath all the lavender and powder, the queen's body did age. Her skin, wrecked by the lead cosmetics she used for so many years, grew thin and scarred. There were rumors of open sores, flaking skin, and a face that could no longer tolerate touch. And yet, she never dropped her rituals. She redoubled them. As she got older, Elizabeth became more and more private, even paranoid. She would not allow her likeness to be painted unless the portrait adhered to strict rules. No wrinkles, no evidence of deterioration. She prohibited mirrors in her private chamber. Others said she had a chambermaid whose one job was to retouch powder on her shoulders when she was alone. The mask of the monarch could not break, not even in seclusion. Bathing, therefore, was not merely shunned through ignorance or sloth. It was spurned because it was too real. Bathing would expose the body, its frailty, its corruption. It would danger stripping away the powder that covered her. Bathing would make the queen a mere human being, and Elizabeth had spent her life proving to the world she was anything but. Later in life, the queen used a perfumed walking stick, upon which she would raise an elegant elbow when walking by extremely odorous courtiers. It was not so much a matter of being polite, but rather a delicate act, a reminder of the distinction between subject and sovereign. Her body was no longer under her sole control, it belonged to the crown. Hygiene in Elizabeth's time was not a matter of health, it was about image, and image was paramount. Queen Elizabeth I is one of the greatest monarchs of all time, not because she was a prim figure, but because she recognized more than anybody else that illusion was a powerful tool. Her cleanliness rituals were not by chance. They lay deeply in a world that conflated purity with stillness, ritual with possession, and image with self. To bathe often was to risk the mask, and Elizabeth could not allow it to slip. So instead she powdered, she perfumed, she posed, and in doing so she transformed herself into something larger than life, something unwashed perhaps, but undeniably unforgettable. In the royal court of Elizabeth I, cleanliness was not a matter of soap and water, it was a matter of survival.